am live. Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy, and our topic for tonight is expanding the fight against neoliberalism. And we're going to go over a number of things here tonight, including the Republican cuts and the CBO, that is the cuts to the spending that the Republicans are proposing. We'll also be talking about the unionization efforts at Tesla. And the effort to clean up the Supreme Court and subpoenas that are going to be issued to some of the billionaires, having an effect on the Supreme Court. We will be also going over the plans of the Biden administration to complete export terminals for liquid natural gas. There's considerable resistance to that. And finally, many of you may know, that Ady Barkan, who was a great hero of the Medicare for All movement, that he has died at 39. And we'll be briefly talking about that as well. So let us begin. Let me sort of clear things out here from Dee's show. And then I'm going to start the stage. Some of the pieces we'll be going over. For this show, of course, if I had a producer, I'd be able to do this a lot faster. But it is what it is. So, it's a favorite thing for the neoliberals in government, who are extremely powerful. The new House Speaker, Mike Johnson, a Republican from Louisiana, is certainly one of those neoliberals. And hang on just a second. Let me share this stream on Facebook. So this piece is about Speaker Johnson. The headline is the GOP's proposed IRS cuts in Israel aid bill would slash federal revenues by 27 billion. So here the GOP in the House is presenting the Democrats with a problem. If they take the GOP deal in the House, then according to the CBO, that's going to leave them with 27 billion less in federal revenue, meaning they're going to have to make some cuts to programs their constituencies like. On the other hand, if they don't accept, the Republican deal, then they'll try to blame the Republicans, but of course the Republicans will run ads against them for voting against the $14 billion in proposed aid to the Israelis. So this is a situation where the Republicans want to have their cake and eat it too. And I don't know, something just flashed on my screen a little while ago that something passed the House. At this point, I'm not so sure what it is. Maybe one of you can tell me. But maybe they got something through the House fairly fast. Anyway, according to this piece, the Congressional Budget Office on Wednesday said the Internal Revenue Service funding cuts Republicans proposed as part of a supplemental aid package for the Israeli military would reduce federal revenues by 26.8 billion. That's where the 27 billion comes from, and add 12.5 billion to the deficit over the next decade. Well, adding money to the deficit is not such a bad thing, of course. That comes to 1.25 billion per year added to the deficit. That's actually good news for the private sector, but the Republicans, of course, will be propagandizing about that, telling everybody how bad it is that we have a deficit of 12.5 billion. But anyway, CBO's estimates undercut the notion that IRS cuts would offset the costs of sending Israel more weaponry and other military assistance. It's widely known that every $1 invested in IRS enforcement efforts yielded at least several dollars of increase in revenue. Of course, the revenue, for those of you who know a bit of MMT, know the revenue is not used for spending. So the increase in revenue doesn't have to yield more spending, but of course, the way the federal government operates, there will be more spending. But the revenue itself will not be used for that. Thanks to funding boosts from the Inflation Reduction Act, the agency has collected $160 million in back taxes from millionaires so far this year. My God, that's such a small amount. $160 million in back taxes. I mean, we're almost through with this fiscal year, folks. Oh, no, I'm sorry. The current fiscal year just started. Right, so maybe that's not so little then. The current fiscal year is only a month old. So if they continue to do it at this pace, then that would amount to roughly $2 billion in back taxes they'll get from billionaires. Anyway, analysts and Democratic lawmakers argued the GOP's proposed $14.3 billion in IRS cuts would hamper the agency's ability to pursue rich tax cheats, thus lowering federal revenue. Quote, Republicans never miss a chance to protect their billionaire donors, unquote. Senate Budget Committee Chair Sheldon Whitehouse, who's who's a Democrat from Rhode Island, said in response to the CBO estimates, noting that the IRS cuts would nearly double the GOP's total cost. Representative Don Beyer, a member of the House Ways and Means Tax Subcommittee, said Wednesday that it is extraordinarily cynical for Republicans to try to exploit international crisis to help wealthy tax cheats avoid paying their taxes. Well, of course, these Republicans are really anarchists, so they're extraordinarily cynical. The CBO's estimate of the Republican bill's deficit impact is far lower than the number put forth by IRS Chief Daniel Werfel, who told the Washington Post on Wednesday the GOP legislation would cost the taxpayers $90 billion. But that actually might be good, because that $90 billion would then be funded anyway through deficit spending. So, without the drag from tax revenues. So that would be good for business. I'm joined by someone. Looks like D is back. Hello, D.
Hello, how you doing?
Okay, we're going through a set of articles dealing with the fight against neoliberalism. And the first of those articles is about the Republican attempt to agree to the Israeli aid package, but at the price of IRS cuts. So the CBO said the IRS cuts would cost $27 billion. The Office of Management and Budget said, no, it was going to cost $90 billion over 10 years. And Sheldon Whitehouse, who took over Bernie's position as the chair of the Budget Committee in the Senate, said it was extraordinarily cynical, of the GOP to try to make hay for their donors from the necessity to fund, a war package. I think what the Republicans were trying to do was to get the Democrats to back off actually spending that additional $14 billion. Because if they backed off, then it would hurt their constituencies. On the other hand, if they were not to back off, then the Republicans could run ads against them, saying the Democrats were not willing to protect Israel through funding. So
Israel doesn't need the U.S.
Yeah, I know. But anyway, it looked like a
Right,
kind of
that's what they're doing.
sandwich move by the Republicans to please
Because
their
people don't know.
donors.
Right, because people don't know.
Yeah, people don't know, so the Republicans are playing that game. Mike Johnson was playing that game. Of course, he doesn't know that the taxes are not needed anyway for spending. So there's that also. Advocacy groups have argued against providing unconditional aid as Israeli forces continue to carry out mass atrocities in Gaza, such as deadly bombings of the enclave's largest refugee camp over the past 2 days. Quote, make no mistake, these human rights abuses are being carried out with U.S. weapons, U.S. funding, and with no red lines, quote unquote, said Ilhan Omar on Wednesday. She wrote this actually on Wednesday in response to the refugee camp attack. Quote, and now we are set to vote an additional $14 billion with no restrictions or conditions The United States contract should not fund violations of U.S. And international law. So she's against the spending, of course.
Mm-hmm.
One of roughly 10 members of the House, one Republican, who are lining up against it, but that's all. So this is probably going to pass. Maybe it passed tonight as well. But anyway, this was a case of Democrats insisting on spending in spite of the Republicans actually favoring spending cuts. I think that's what they really wanted, but they didn't want to be seen as being in favor of denying Israel aid. So they tried to get something big from the Democrats in return for their donors. So this was very, very political, of course. And it's all based on the fact that people don't understand that tax revenue does not pay for anything. If the people understood this, they could see through the Republicans' ploy perfectly well. So moving on to a second post. The UAW pledges all necessary resources to help to unionize a key Tesla factory that's going up, that's already up in Fremont, California. But I also understand they're interested, in unionizing a plant that has yet to go up in Georgia. But we'll get to that in a little while.
Mm-hmm.
It's pieces by Jake Johnson. It was October 31st, 2023. There's a subtitle quote there, quote, "Not even Musk can hide from the labor movement forever." I think that was a quote from, I don't know, maybe Sean Fain or maybe a vice president of the UAW. Anyway, this piece is by Jake Johnson, and it reads, the United Auto Workers has reportedly offered to provide organizers with all the resources they need to unionize Tesla's electric car factory in Fremont, California, an effort that would pit an invigorated UAW against a company run by Elon Musk, the world's richest man and an aggressive union buster. So this is a big effort. If the UAW is successful, it will be a big victory against the neoliberals. So, following news Monday that the UAW reached a tentative contract agreement with GM, final Big Three holdout after 6 weeks on strike, Bloomberg reported that, quote, Tesla's roughly 20,000 worker plant in Fremont, California, currently has a UAW organizing committee whose members are talking to co-workers about the advantages of collective bargaining. Quote, and the UAW has committed to providing whatever resources are necessary for the campaign, unquote. Bloomberg added, citing an unnamed person familiar with the nascent organizing push. And Josh Idelson tweeted, Big Three UAW members told me they'd be eager to help organize at Tesla and other non-union companies. Quote, go out west to California? Absolutely, I would go. Show them our strength, unquote. And there's a link to a news article from Bloomberg. And this was this tweet was a quote of another tweet by Josh Idelson. New employees at Tesla's Fremont, California car factory have formed an organizing committee with the UAW. After the UAW's big wins at the Big Three will this time be different? And another Bloomberg News article is cited with that Dana Hull. So Tesla dominates the U.S. electric vehicle market and has been a target of union organizers for years. 2017, Tesla fired an employee who was helping lead a unionization effort at the Fremont factory, which was unionized before Tesla purchased it over a decade ago. The NLRB ruled the 2017 firing amounted to an unlawful retaliation for protected union activity, a finding that was later upheld in federal court. Earlier this year, Tesla terminated dozens of workers at its Buffalo, New York factory, a day after a group of employees sent a letter to Musk informing him of their intention to unionize. The fired workers have filed a complaint with the NLRB. So Bloomberg noted Monday that Musk has personally spoken out against unionization efforts, calling the 2017 push, quote, morally outrageous, unquote, after a Tesla employee and organizer published an article decrying the company's low wages and dangerous working conditions. Like not allowing people to pee. Well, I guess that's actually Amazon, right? That wasn't Tesla. In 2018, Musk tweeted that there is, quote, nothing stopping Tesla team at our car plant from voting union, unquote. Quote again, but why pay union dues and give up stock options for nothing, unquote, he said. He asked. The NLRB found that the tweet, which is still up, violated U.S. labor law, a decision that Tesla has appealed. It's funny. UAW President Shawn Fain, who was elected by the rank and file earlier this year after an insurgent campaign. He's certainly the most aggressive head of the UAW since the legendary Walter Reuther in times gone by. Walter Reuther is our leader, we shall not be moved. Walter Reuther is our leader, we shall not be moved. Like a tree standing by the water, we shall not be moved. Anyway, he signaled in a speech over the weekend that the UN is eyeing fresh unionization drives at Tesla, Toyota, and other non-union car manufacturers. I never understood that with respect to Toyota. Toyota in Japan is unionized. They've always been unionized. They come here and they don't want to unionize. And other non-union car manufacturers, after securing historic tentative contract agreements with the General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis. Stellantis, of course, is the umbrella company that took over Chrysler a few years back. Quote, one of our biggest goals coming out of this historic contract victory is to organize like we've never organized before, unquote, Fain said. Quote, when we return to the bargaining table in 2028, it won't just be with the big three, it will be the big five or big six. So Shawn Fain is throwing down the gauntlet. Fain has previously called out Musk by name for treating workers poorly while enriching himself. In a CBS News interview in September, the UAW president said that auto workers and non-union car companies, unquote, are scraping to get by so that greedy CEOs and greedy people like Elon Musk can build more rocket ships and shoot theirself in outer space. That's funny. Shoot theirself in outer space, quote, and that's unacceptable, unquote, Fain added. The New York Times reported Monday the UAW is also planning to target foreign automakers with non-union factories in the U.S. Southeast. Quote, some of the biggest plants are under construction in Georgia, a critical swing state for 2024, including a Hyundai electric vehicle plant that will be the state's biggest economic development project ever, unquote. The Times noted in an op-ed for The Guardian last month. The labor writer Hamilton Nolan argued that, quote, Tesla is now one of the most important union targets in America, given its structural role in undermining everything the UAW is fighting for, unquote. Quote again, we can have a profitable auto industry that provides good quality union jobs to hundreds of thousands of workers and helps resurrect the beleaguered middle class, or we can have a profitable American auto industry that provides billions of dollars to people like Musk and pushing wages as low as the most desperate worker in rural South Carolina will accept, unquote. Nolan wrote, quote, not even Musk can hide from the labor movement forever, Nolan added. And quote again, it's been around a lot longer than he has. And again, this one was by Jake Johnson. So that's certainly an example of the continuing fight against the neoliberals. In fact, the richest of the neoliberals of all, Elon Musk. So now we moved to a piece. Please interrupt if you have any comments, Dee.
Yeah, I had to shut myself off for a bit because the dogs were barking. So
Okay. Uh,
you seem so low down today.
oh, you mean my face is low down?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the way I'm sitting in my chair. I can fix that.
So I was gonna say because I look so high up there.
Oh,
Like,
am I usually so high up there?
now you look good. Now I can really see you. So otherwise I was like up high and you're like down lower, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, that's good. That's very good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here is the next piece. This one is about Dick Durbin standing on his hind legs for the first time since he said back in something like 2006 or 2007, he famously said, the banks run this place.
Well,
Okay,
they
Dick
do.
Durbin is the whip of the Democratic Party, the majority party in the Senate of the U.S., and yet he's hardly ever heard from. He is still the heir apparent to Chuck Schumer as the majority leader if the Democrats were to retain the Senate, though I have no idea why they would continue to retain the Senate since they do so little. But anyway, here, is Dick Durbin, quote, speaking to reporters in the Capitol on March 14, 2023, quote, important first step, Durbin moves to subpoena rich benefactors of Alito Thomas. Quote, the American people demand and deserve an ethical Supreme Court, unquote, said the Democrat-controlled Senate Judiciary Committee. This one's by Jessica Corbett, November 2nd, 2023. That, of course, is today. Okay, so amid mounting calls to address ethics concerns with the U.S. Supreme Court Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Dick Durbin on Thursday unveiled his motion to subpoena three wealthy men with ties to right-wing justices Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas. The panel, quote, will vote to subpoena Harlan Crow, Robin Arkley, and Leonard Leo, the famous Leonard Leo, the architect of the actual creation of this corrupt Supreme Court. Uh, Robin Arkley and Leonard Leo are two billionaire mega donors. Harlan Crow is another billionaire mega donor. And one of their enablers, oh, maybe what they mean here is that Harlan Crow is a billionaire and Leonard Leo, Robin Arkley is a billionaire. Okay, and Leonard Leo is not a billionaire himself, but is one of the enablers of the billionaires. I think that's what he means. Who sit at the center of the ethical crisis currently gripping the United States Supreme Court. Durbin said in a floor speech earlier this week, quote, this vote is the next step in the committee's ongoing investigation on the ethics of the Supreme Court, unquote. He noted, quote again, comes only after Mr. Crow refused to comply with committee requests and Mr. Leo and Arkley outright stonewalled the committee in the exercise of our constitutional authority. And here's a tweet that says, this kickstarts debate and the next steps to a full committee vote as soon as next week. So they're going to vote on the subpoena to these guys next week. They're going to act relatively fast for the Senate. And that, of course, is good. Durbin, who's also the majority whip of the Senate, said on social media Thursday that the panel could vote as soon as next week, so it's repeating itself there. Citing a committee spokesperson, NBC News reported it would likely be scheduled for November 9th, so in 1 week then from today. After Durbin and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who chairs a key subcommittee, confirmed the subpoena plans on Monday, Crow's office pointed out that he shared some information with senators and called the new move a stunt aimed at undermining a sitting Supreme Court justice for ideological and political purposes. Leo, who heads the Federalist Society, a key force in shifting the U.S. judiciary to the right. That's what I meant when I said he was the architect of the current corrupt Supreme Court. Similarly responded that, quote, I will not bow to the vile and disgusting liberal McCarthyism that seeks to destroy the Supreme Court simply because it follows the Constitution rather than their political agenda, unquote. Yeah, try to make it all about politics when every decision is in favor of the rich and opposed to the poor, when every decision is in favor of the evangelical Christians as opposed to everyone else. Yeah, sure, it's all political. Throughout this year, reporters in Democrat-controlled Senate panels have exposed various instances of rich and powerful people providing Alito and Thomas with previously undisclosed gifts. So, of course, this is about dump the corruption as well. Thanks, honey. From luxury trips to private school tuition for I think it was his nephew, Thomas's nephew. In Thomas' case, dozens of groups nationwide are now demanding his immediate resignation. That's a demand that's long overdue. Quote, how can a Supreme Court justice accept such lavish gifts, let alone fail to disclose them to the American people, unquote? How? Well, he just did it. That's all. He just did it. He's a liar and he did it. Durbin said in his speech, quote, the Supreme Court of the United States, the highest court in the land, does not have an enforceable code of conduct, unquote. That is, by the way, folks, that quote, that is a statement of fact. Durbin is completely right about that. Democrats on his panel passed White House's Supreme Court Ethics Recusal and Transparency, the Assert Act, in July, but the bill is unlikely to be approved by the full Senate or the Republican-dominated House. Of course, because they just love the corruption of the Supreme Court. Following that vote, Sam Alito publicly suggested that Congress lacks the power, he means the authority under the Constitution, to regulate the High Court, which experts called, quote, wrong and frightening. It's not just wrong and frightening, it's obviously wrong and frightening because the power to regulate the Supreme Court is written into the Constitution. Specifically, the Supreme Court can determine the term of the justices. They don't have to be life terms. Moreover, the Supreme Court can determine the number of justices. They don't have to be 9, they can be 15. And Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution can regulate specifically the cases which the Supreme Court can decide. Congress can pass a law, and in that law have some phrases from Article 3, Section 2, prohibiting the Supreme Court from judicial review with respect to the legislation in question. So obviously, they have the power and the authority to regulate the Supreme Court. If they added 6 additional justices, they could make Justice Alito irrelevant. Following that vote, I'm sorry, I did that again. So here's a tweet from the Senate Judiciary Committee. And that's from @Judiciary Dems, but the chair is Dick Durbin, so it's basically from Dick Durbin. He says Senate Judiciary Republicans might want us to sit idly by and do nothing about Supreme Court ethics reform. We refuse to. The American people demand and deserve an ethical Supreme Court. They also deserve a Supreme Court that is operating in the 21st century instead of the 16th, 17th, or 18th century. We're demanding that as well. And to get that, I think what you're going to have to do is impeach a couple of them and add another 6. Quote, so far, the Chief Justice John Roberts and the court have failed to do anything, unquote, Durbin stressed. And quote again, I am sorry to say I happen to believe that we have just seen a small amount of the lavish gifts that have gone to the Supreme Court thanks to the efforts of investigative journalists and the Senate Finance Committee that have discovered some of these things, unquote. Quote, I'm not going to stand idly by as these fawning billionaires with interest before the court use their immense wealth to buy private access to the justices and then deny Senate Judiciary Committee information to which we're lawfully entitled, unquote. He vowed, quote, that is why the committee will vote to authorize subpoenas to these individuals. Well, that's great, but of course, he has been standing idly by for the last 20 years while this Supreme Court has gone to hell. So it's very good news that he finally proposes to do something, however inadequate it may be. National advocacy groups on Monday delivered over 400,000 petition signatures to the offices of Durbin and the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, demanding probes of recent claims against Alito and Thomas, and a floor vote for the Yes Cert Act. Quote, we cannot afford to sit back and hope this issue resolves itself, said Stand Up America Executive Director Christina Harvey. Quote again, we need urgent action to meet this moment. It's time for Senate leaders to step in and do something If the court cannot act in an ethical manner and put the will of the people over their wealthy benefactors, that is, people over profits, then Congress must act now. The group later thanked Durbin and White House for their quote, that's Sheldon Whitehouse, the new chair of the Budget Committee in the Senate, for their quote, leadership in taking this important step, unquote, of launching the subpoena process, and called for public hearings to understand quote, to understand the full scope of influence these right-wing mega donors had on sitting justices. And to that, all I have to say is dump the corruption, folks. Dump the corruption. Because it's there and we really got to dump it. So, on to.
That's true. I was going to say, that's true. We got to dump the corruption.
And in the Supreme Court as well, because the corruption has been governing the Supreme Court, I think, for decades now, but certainly since 2010. So let me go on. Here we have one of the leading offenders himself, President Joe Biden. Here are people demonstrating no fracked gas exports and lethal, noxious greenhouse gas. Two demonstrators holding up signs posting the export of liquefied natural gas. Headline is Biden, do the right thing and halt new LNG export facilities. What Colombia is to cocaine, the U.S. is to hydrocarbons, a supplier, pusher of molecules so dangerous that the two poles are now melting fast. This one is by Bill McKibben, the environmentalist and climate warrior. It comes from the blog The Crucial Years, which is Bill McKibben's blog, but it was published on November 2nd by Common Dreams. Okay, I'm going to tell a story about what should have been the worst ever for the oil industry and actually may have turned out to be the best ever. It's December 2015, and the world is focused on Paris, where climate negotiators from every nation on earth are on the verge of successfully hammering out a real agreement for the first time. And the language, at least, of that agreement is strong. The world's nations declared they were committed to, quote, holding the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and pursuing efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, recognizing this would significantly reduce the risks and impacts of climate change. That language, especially the 1.5 degrees Celsius pledge, included the insistence of small island and African nations who'd adopted the slogan, quote, 1.5 to stay alive, unquote, has formed much of the climate change agenda in the years since, as countries and companies adopt policies designed to keep themselves within a, quote, 1.5 degree framework, unquote. That should spell constant decline of the hydrocarbon industry, except that very same week, the U.S. Congress, with almost no notice of debate, did something that may completely undercut the changes for a 1.5 degrees Celsius or even a 2 degrees Celsius world. It repealed the long-standing ban. But D, I think there's a lot of noise coming from your mic. It repealed the long-standing ban on exporting U.S. oil abroad. The GOP-led House had passed a similar bill earlier in the fall, but it took concurrence from the Senate. And in this case, several key Democratic senators who took a deal that extended production tax credits for wind turbines in exchange for lifting the export ban that had been in place since the Arab oil embargoes of the 1970s. God, that is so awful. I can remember sitting in a Paris cafe writing an op ed against lifting the ban. Sierra Club executive director Mike Brune there in Paris with his family for the talks, edited and co-signed it with me. Quote, ending the oil export ban is a poor idea on many grounds. Unions oppose it because it will cost refinery jobs. Conservationists oppose it because it will lead to more drilling in sensitive areas and increased pollution in communities of color. It makes a mockery of the idea that we're actually interested in, quote, energy interdependence, unquote. Energy independence, unquote. We'd get 4,500 more rail cars a day full of explosive oil. It's such bad policy that 69% of Americans across both parties oppose lifting the ban. Even as we worked on the piece, though, we knew it was likely a lost cause. Exxon wanted it. Quote, the sooner this happens, the better for us, unquote, its spokesman explained, and there was simply no way to rally a fight against the change, with every environmental journalist on earth focused instead on the outcome of the Paris talks. And so the ban was lifted, and the damage has been massive. The United States is now the largest exporter of gas and oil on earth, having roared past Russia and Saudi Arabia. What Colombia is to cocaine, the U.S. is to hydrocarbons, a supplier and pusher of molecules so dangerous that the two poles are now melting fast. Sadly, the damage is set to get far worse, as Oil Change International said in a landmark September report. The U.S. is responsible for more than a third of planned fossil fuel expansion around the world between now and 2030, far more than any other country. In other words, profits over people, I add, the essence of neoliberalism. We are, it concluded, going back to the article, we are, it concluded, the quote, planet wrecker in chief, unquote. The other biggest troublemakers include Canada, Norway, and Australia, which is to say, rich, well educated countries that can find plenty of other ways to make a living. For Norway, however, and I'm just commenting on this, for Norway, however, since they discovered oil, came the North Sea and have been pumping it out and sending it all over, they have developed a very large sovereign wealth fund because they're able to run the surpluses. And so it's going to be very hard to make them stop pumping and shipping the oil. Our status as planet wrecker is most obvious when it comes to liquefied natural gas. I wrote a few weeks ago about the plans for 20 more massive LNG terminals, mostly along the Gulf of Mexico. The proponents justified them as, quote, cleaner than coal, unquote, arguing that gas would serve as a transition fuel in Asian nations. As I pointed out, the world no longer officially believes in this kind of transition, but instead is committed to net zero policies. The International Energy Agency has called for an end to all such new infrastructure. But it turns out that even on those narrow grounds, quote, better than coal, unquote, better than coal, unquote, American gas exports are absurd. As I reported yesterday in the New Yorker, New data from the Dean of Methane Scientists, um, um, Cornell's Bob Howarth, shows that so much methane escapes from the ships carrying LNG abroad that when all is said and done, it's at least 24% worse for the climate than coal. This new data perhaps will help persuade the Biden administration to do the right thing to announce a halt to licensing any new LNG facilities until they've spent a few years doing a careful analysis to figure out what a piece of folly this is, and they can make that announcement with political cover. Then, as now, polling data shows Americans hate fracking up our nation only to export the results, understanding that it will drive up the cost of energy for Americans. They must do it because the numbers are simply astonishing, as Jeremy Simons has calculated. If the industry gets to build out all those facilities, they will be associated with the extra 3.2 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions annually, which is close to the entire annual emissions of the European Union. That is insane, says Bill McKibben. But Biden could again, without doing himself political damage, and perhaps recouping some of the goodwill lost when he opened up Alaska to new drilling this summer, begin to stuff this export genie back into the bottle. I just got a beep, which means somebody who signed in. It is Jawad.
Hey,
Hello, Jawad. How are you?
good. You want something that I drawn? I've drawn something.
Yes, you have joined here.
Yes.
That is
Yeah,
good.
it's good to see you.
Then
So,
I drawed Palestine.
I'm sorry, you brought something about what?
I drawn Palestine. Do you see?
It's hard to see. You drew a map of Palestine,
Yes, the current map.
of the current map of Palestine.
Yes, I have another one to show you.
Okay, I can't see it very well.
Yes, sir, Arafat. Wait.
Okay, that's a drawing of Yasser Arafat.
Yes.
Okay.
I drawn myself by my own.
Hello, Jawad.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you for that. Uh, we are we're talking now about groups that want Joe Biden to do the right thing and halt the new export facilities for liquid natural gas. And I was in the middle of going over that article. Uh, so I just got through pointing out that according to the article, the liquid natural gas, if shipped overseas, will leak so much of the methane that there'll be an extra 3.2 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions each year, which is close to the entire annual emissions of the European Union. That is insane. But
Yes.
Biden could again, without doing himself political damage and perhaps recouping some of the goodwill lost when he opened up Alaska to new oil drilling this summer, begin to stuff this export genie back into the bottle, undoing at least a little bit of the enormous damage that this Obama era concession produced. Hey, this is an article by Bill McKibben, by the way, Jawad. We've got to hold exporters responsible for the greenhouse gases those exports produce. Otherwise, we're just playing games. I think he says actually paying games here, but I think he meant to say playing games. The U.S. is number one here, a truly ignoble distinction. But that means that we have the single greatest remaining chance to limit the damage of fossil fuels. We're very much in the end game. The question is who will play it better. The oil industry won in 2015. They've got to lose in 2023. So what do you think of that, folks? Is the oil industry going to lose in 2023?
Yeah, because we need to stop the oil by 2015.
We need to stop the oil long before that.
Yes.
If we don't get the oil under control, fossil fuels under control in the next 3 years, we're all done for.
Yep.
Or at least that, okay, is my view. So let me go to the final article here. This is some news that is not good for the fight against, the neoliberals. And specifically, it's bad for the fight for universal health care and Medicare for all here, in the United States. The warrior for health care, known, as Ady Barkan, who was very sick himself, after a long struggle, has died at the age of 39. The progressive movement, the article says, has lost a hero. It's quote unquote. Ady Barkan, Medicare for All champion, dies at 39. Quote, there are no words to capture his brilliance, moral clarity, and immense capacity to imagine and fight for a new world, unquote. I guess I didn't actually present that. I see. I thought I did, but I guess I did not. So here we go. It is now presented. So going forward, this article was written by Jake Johnson today, November 2nd. And what the article says is, Ady Barkan, a powerful moral force in the fight for a just healthcare system, died at the age of 39 from complications of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, commonly known as ALS, or previously known as Lou Gehrig's disease, the old name. Following his terminal diagnosis in 2016, just months after the birth of his son, Carl, Ady Barkan campaigned tirelessly for Medicare for All and other progressive causes, frequently taking part in Capitol Hill protests, congressional hearings, and conversations with prominent political figures, even as he lost the ability to stand, walk, and speak on his own. 2020, he delivered an address to the Democratic National Committee using a voice-generating device that was attached to his wheelchair. Quote, like so many of you, I have experienced the ways our healthcare system is fundamentally broken, enormous costs, denied claims, dehumanizing treatment when we are most in need, unquote, Barkan said. Quote, since my shocking diagnosis, I have traveled the country meeting countless patients like me, demanding more of our representatives and our democracy, unquote. He was very kind to still call us a democracy. Too kind, I believe. Barkan's death was announced Wednesday by his wife, whose name, is Rachel, I guess. Or Rachel. Not sure how she pronounces it. Quote, you probably knew that Ady, as a healthcare activist, unquote. She wrote, quote, but more importantly, he was a wonderful dad and my life partner, okay, for 18 years. And she tweeted, hi all, this is Addie's wife, Rachel. I'm devastated to share the news that Addie has died from complications of ALS. You probably knew Addie as a healthcare activist, but more importantly, he was a wonderful dad and my life partner, okay, for 18 years. That's a picture of the two of them with their son, okay, and daughter. On November 1st, 2023. Wow, that's a recent picture. Well, maybe that's the time of his death. Be a Hero, an advocacy organization that Barkan co-founded in 2018, the year that before the birth of his daughter Willow, said in a statement that Ady, quote, inspired many of us to join the fight for universal access to life-saving and life-giving health care, unquote. Ady was a lifelong activist, okay, and movement lawyer, unquote, said Jamila Headley, the group's co-executive director. Quote, before he co-founded Be a Hero in 2018, Ady spent years fighting to advance worker rights and economic justice at social justice organizations, including Make the Road New York and Center for Popular Democracy, where he co-founded the Fed Up Campaign and Local Progress, unquote. Quote, up until his death, unquote, Headley continued, quote again, Ady spent his days working with the Be a Hero team of staff and volunteers to stop health insurance corporations from gouging Medicare and denying patients care, in fighting to make it possible for people with disabilities and older adults who need home and community-based services to get the care they need, surrounded by the people they love. And Be a Hero tweeted, it is with deep sadness that we announce the death of our co-founder, co-executive director, Ady Barkan, at age 39 due to ALS-related complications. Ady will continue to be at the heart of Be a Hero and what we do here for years to come. He was 39 years old. And there's a graphic, which I will not read because the print is very small. News of Barkan's passing was met with an outpouring of tributes from those who worked alongside him for healthcare and social justice. There are no words to capture, quote, there are no words to capture uh, Ady Barkan's brilliance, moral clarity, and immense capacity to imagine and fight for a new world, unquote. Okay, the progressive activist Anna Maria Archula wrote on social media. Quote again, my dear friend, rest in power forever and always. Your voice will guide us, unquote. And Representative Pramila Jayapal chaired the Congressional Progressive Caucus and one of the lead sponsors of Medicare for All, legislation in the House, said in a statement late Wednesday that, quote, the progressive movement has lost a hero tonight. Quote, Ady Barkan accomplished more in his too short time here than most do many lifetimes over. This country and the lives of all of us who knew and loved him are better for it, unquote, said Jayapal, whose Medicare for All bill now has the support of more than half of the House Democratic caucus. But, and I have to add here, but in spite of this, cannot get a floor vote in the House. With more than half of the House Democratic caucus, it cannot get a floor vote in the House. Quote, I am devastated to lose a champion, a partner, and a friend. My Progressive Caucus colleagues and I are with all those mourning Ady tonight And we send our deepest condolences to Rachel, to Carl, okay, and Willow, unquote. Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, the Senate's um, um, top proponent of Medicare for All, wrote on social media that, quote, Ady Barkan was an inspiration to all of us, unquote. Quote, there are very few people in this country who have done more to make healthcare a human right, unquote. Sanders added, quote, to honor his life, let us dedicate ourselves to completing his work, unquote. And that ends the tribute article from Common Dreams. What I have to say about this is it is truly a sad event. But in spite, okay, of all his efforts, the people in favor of Medicare for All could never get a floor vote for it. Not when the Republicans controlled the House and the Senate, not when the Democrats controlled the House, okay, and the Senate. Mr. Nothing will fundamentally change,
Mhm.
and the majority leader in the Senate and Ms. Nancy Pelosi in the House would never give the legislation a floor vote. And even if it were co sponsored by 3/4 of the Democratic caucus, as long as Nancy Pelosi was the leader, it would never get a floor vote in the House.
Did you? There's not long ago, Nancy Pelosi's house was attacked by some guy.
Huh?
You didn't know?
Sorry, Jawad?
There's once in the past, the house of Nancy Pelosi was attacked.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
She used to be the Speaker of the House. She's no longer the Speaker of the House, but she was the Speaker of the House for 4 years, from 2019 to 2023. And during those 4 years, she never would give a floor vote, okay, to Medicare for All. She was famous for that. And her successor as the leader of the Democrats in the House, specifically Hakeem Jeffries, is also known for having been bought by the healthcare interests. And he is unlikely, even if he wins back the House and becomes the Speaker of the House, uh, it's very unlikely that the House is going to get a floor vote for Medicare for All. The only way that will happen is if the Dump the Corruption campaign sweeps out of the House all of those congresspeople who have been bought by the healthcare industry or who are friendly to those who have been bought by the healthcare industry. There's no other way to do this, to get a vote for Medicare for All, except to go through a Dump the Corruption campaign.
Yep.
And that is the God's honest truth. And by the way, Jawad,
Yes.
would you like to tell us about healthcare in Canada?
Well, it's okay here. The government take cares of it. They pay the doctors. They take care of everything here. The healthcare here in Canada is totally free for all civilians in the country.
And I have to say, as someone who has lived here in the United States my whole life, that if I were a young man just starting out, I would move to Canada.
For real?
And one of the big reasons why I would is because there is Medicare for all, okay, in Canada. There is also very low cost college, okay, in Canada. These
Yeah,
are two things that people need. There is a much stronger safety net in the unemployment area in Canada, okay, as well. In general, Canada is much more friendly to its citizens than is the United States.
seriously? That's so kind.
And therefore, I think that for young people, that is a better place to go and to live. So, uh, shall we go over the comments? There are a
Yes.
few here. Robert says, is this aid package going to weapons or humanitarian aid? My understanding that it's going to keep the government open and for weapons,
Yes, that's what I understand. The weapons.
to keep the war alive and to keep the economy going in order to avoid a collapse, okay, in Ukraine, because the only thing that's keeping the economy going there is the U.S. money going into it. Steve Wolfman said, I got to go to bed. Good night, fam. Thank you, Steve, and have a good night. Kay says that Ohio has been ruined, okay, with fracking. Yes, it has. I understand that. Robert Copeland says, I don't believe we need a hero if everybody starts fighting over issues they believe in that helps the people. And I don't believe we need a hero if we all go out there and dump the corruption. By the way, I'll take this opportunity to point out that tomorrow night, Christina Khalil, who's running for the Senate, okay, in New Jersey, and I believe she'll be running against current Congressman Andy Kim, and not against uh, uh, Senator Menendez, who I believe will be easily beaten in the primary by Andy Kim. So that's who Christina Khalil is going to be running against. Okay, in my view, she's Green Party candidate. She's for Medicare for all, of course, but we'll be hearing more from her tomorrow night about what she's for. And I'm going to spend a good deal of time talking with her about the need for her to run a dump the corruption campaign so she can equalize, or I should say, nullify the funding advantage that Andy Kim is going to have over her. If she's like the other Green Party candidates, she has no realistic uh, chance, okay, of raising enough money by herself to run head to head on a positive message, okay, against Andy Kim. Okay, but if she can equalize the campaign by running a high-profile dump the corruption campaign, spreading the news about dump the corruption, then she would be able to compete because people would, if they get the message, will automatically vote against Andy Kim because of all the money he raises. In his 2020 campaign, well, let's just go over it. In his first campaign in 2018, he raised $6.34 million. In his second campaign, he raised $7.24 million. That was in 2020, of course. In 2022, he raised $7.02 million. And so far in his 2024 campaign, even though the election is far away, he is still sitting at $2.09 million, which by itself would probably outspend the Green Party opponent by at least 10 times. At least 10 times. So any normal message by the Green Party opponent would likely be drowned out by, first of all, negative campaigning by Andy Kim, and also just by all the money that Andy Kim is going to have and going to spend. On the other hand, if a dump the corruption campaign is run and people adopt the dump the corruption rule, then they would automatically vote against Andy Kim just because of all the money that he was raising and spending. Anyway, Robert Copeland also says, in order to get a floor vote for Medicare for all, you're going to need to replace around 50% of the Democrats and all the Republicans in the House and the Senate. And the only way you're going to do that, Robert, is with dump the corruption. Robert says, healthcare in the United States is terrible and costs so much for the average person. Robert says, I hate typos. Me too. Yes, it's terrible and it costs so much for the average person. By the way, the amount we spend on healthcare per person is something like, I believe it's $12,400 per person here in the United States. I believe that may be more than double the amount that Canada spends per person. And of course, as you know, we don't cover everybody.
Are you aware that there's still some American Palestinians stuck in Gaza, and the Biden administration is not doing nothing about it?
I'm sorry, who's stuck in Gaza?
Uh, American civilians.
Oh, you mean some of the American civilians who were taken as hostage by Hamas?
No, Palestinian Americans.
Oh,
Kids are having a hard time.
Palestinian Americans stuck in Gaza, and Biden isn't doing anything about it.
Yep.
So he's acting in the same way towards them that he acted towards Shireen Abu Akleh, who was killed by an Israeli sniper deliberately, and the United States has done nothing about that murder.
Also, not only Palestinian Americans that are stuck in Gaza, but also some civilians of Canada too that are stuck in Gaza.
Okay, so is Canada doing anything about that?
We are taking the situation seriously.
Oh, at least that's good. So Robert Copeland says, I hate typos. Robert Copeland says all that money can pay for a lot of campaign manners and a lot of campaign matters, a TV political ad. But by the way, since Andy is running for the Senate, before he's through this year, he likely will have raised $30 million for a Senate run, maybe even $40 million for a Senate run. He will raise comparable funds to Cory Booker. So that's what Christina Khalil, is running against. So without an entirely new way of voting, she and every other Green Party candidate is sure to lose. If they want to win, they have to teach people a new way of voting. That new way is voting against the big money. So Kay agrees with Robert, and I think that's takes care of all the comments. So Dee, have you anything more you want to say?
Not really. We're just in the same mess we're always in, right?
Yeah,
Neoliberalism.
we're in the neoliberal mess. We are. And Jawad, have you any more to say?
No, it's okay. You?
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming. And thank you very much for coming to all. And hopefully, I will see you tomorrow night when Christina Khalil will be my guest. And I suspect that also Madeline Hoffman will be joining us for that show. And I suspect Dee will also be joining us for that show as well.
Mhm.
Uh, all those who come will be talking to Christina Khalil and learning what kind of person she is. By the way, her origin, is from Egypt, and she was brought up here in foster care, in the United States, and has worked her way through school, and is quite a personal success story to tell, which of course we will be going over for part of the time tomorrow. Anyway, I think she's a real fighter and a real hard worker and a very deserving person. So we'll learn more about her tomorrow. So on that note, I'm going to say good night.
Good night.
And once again, thank you all for coming.
Yes, and good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
And
Good
buy
night.
Joe a coffee.
And good night, Joward. Oh yeah, please buy me a coffee. And please visit my Patreon page as well every once in a while. Thanks very much, everybody, and thank you, Dee,
Yes,
for
good
reminding
night.
me about that. And Robert Copeland says, I hate to see how much money is spent on the Senate in California. Yeah, that's probably going to be in excess of 100 million, Robert. I mean, maybe each of the candidates will spend 100 million. I think for the Senate, Katie Porter has the capacity to raise $100 million, but we'll see if she does that.
Keep talking about that. Sounds like the Hezbollah group is totally launching a air attack on the Israelis.
Oh, Hezbollah is announcing, has announced an air attack on the Israelis.
Yep, an air attack, not a ground attack, but a air attack.
They also gave the Israelis, an ultimatum today, saying that if there's not a ceasefire by November 3rd, they will formally come into the war.
Yep, with Iran backing them, of course.
Right, and with close to 200,000 missiles on their side.
Yep.
So that's going to be very interesting. So once again, see you all tomorrow. Have a very nice evening.
Thank you.
Yes, good night.